Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. The recent election in Pakistan has raised fundamental and critical questions about the country. Why has Pakistan failed to become a credible democracy? And why is it repeatedly prone to military takeovers or behind-the-scenes covert military control? Those are two issues I shall raise today with one of Pakistan's foremost political scientists, Emeritus Professor of Political Science at Stockholm University, Ishtiaq Ahmed. Professor Ahmed, Pakistan has just held what arguably could be the most shameful election in its 77-year history. Imran Khan was jailed, his party was stripped of its election symbol, the internet was switched off on voting day, and social media claims that there was mass rigging when the counting happened. As a Pakistani, and equally importantly, as a renowned political scientist, what's your opinion of this election?
Well, this election is a very dramatic form of what has happened in the past. For me, it is a bit of a surprise, but not a shock. Although the dramatic effects it has produced because of the social media are a new thing, but Pakistani elections being rigged is actually a chronic, endemic part of the distorted political process which started from day one, when it's the executive governor general who assumed more powers than the prime minister, and then the military took over, and since then they have been calling the shots. I've said that at least from the 1980 onwards, Pakistan's domestic policy and foreign policy is decided by the establishment or the deep state. I say that they have veto powers over it. So even this time, the people have voted very differently from what the establishment had planned and wanted. So that's the situation.
When you say that this election is a very dramatic form of what's happened in the past, are you also suggesting this is the worst election Pakistan has held in its 77-year history?
Depends on how you want me to interpret this statement of yours. The worst election was actually, ironically, the first and last free and fair elections in 1970, which resulted actually in the breakup of Pakistan because the verdict of the people, even at that time, was rejected by the same establishment, and it led to a civil war, and ultimately Pakistan broke into two.
But if you accept the election of 1971 and put it on one side, is
Yeah.
the election that's just been held this year the worst?
Yes, I would say, because it's so blatant. The way it has happened, this time they were very clever. In 2018, they ensured that Nawaz Sharif was and his party were defeated in a complete sense. And Imran Khan, who was then the blue-eyed boy, won handsomely. This time, they didn't do it in such a blatant manner. They let PTI win a large number of seats, but not enough. to form the government. Although, if it were a fair election, most of the people agree that the PTI would have had the majority or with the help of one or two parties formed the government.
The commissioner of Rawalpindi, Liaquat Chatta, has publicly confirmed that at least in 13 seats, Imran Khan supported candidates with leads of up to 70,000 in each case were made to lose, and their opponents, presumably from the PMLN, were declared winners. Mr. Chatta has said that the Chief Election Commissioner and also the Chief Justice of the country are involved in this deliberate fraud. How do you respond to this? And has anything like this ever been said before?
I don't think so. So this is also something entirely new. It's unprecedented. But what I didn't understand was that although he might have evidence, and I tend to think that that should be possible, of these 13 riggings, the connection between this entire rigging process and the involvement of the Chief Justice is not clear to me, but that of the Chief Election Commissioner is quite apparent because he runs the whole system. And so if in his name these results have been announced, which are not accurate, which are maneuvered, manipulated, then definitely the Chief Election Commissioner should also be included in this.
Let's at this point, Professor Ahmed, widen our discussion a little.
Yeah.
The truth is, Pakistani analysts themselves, people like Najm Sethi, Hamid Mir, Zahid Hussain, have long maintained that Pakistan, since 1970, has not held a fair election.
Yeah.
They prefer to call elections selections. Given
Right.
democracy has taken pretty substantial deep roots in India and Sri Lanka, why has it failed to do so in Pakistan?
Because Pakistan is an ideological idea, it's an ideological project. If we want democracy, one of the preconditions is that religion and politics be kept apart. That's not the case with Pakistan. We have a whole set of liberal rights as you have in the Indian Constitution, but then all the limitations or qualifications that freedom of this, freedom of that, equality, so on, has to be enjoyed within the way the Quran and Sunnah describe them, and the glory of Islam should be paramount. Now, interpreting such a relationship is always problematic. How can you have a democracy which has on its laws a blasphemy law, which is actually a license for lynching people? So people think that the electoral procedure is enough to establish a democracy. I don't think so. So even when democratic governments have been elected, some of their decisions have been atrociously undemocratic. For example, it's the Pakistan National Assembly which, without any exception, declared the Ahmadiyya community non-Muslims. So that's a democratic decision, but its product is woefully illiberal.
So you're saying to me, Professor Ahmed,
Yeah.
that the deliberate imposition of a theological umbrella has deformed Pakistan's democracy and has ensured that it has not become a credible democracy. It's theology that is the impediment to becoming an effective democracy.
That's an argument I presented in several of my publications, and I stand behind it. All that has been validated over time.
So in other words, if Pakistan wants to be a democracy, it must become a secular country. It must cease to be a fundamental theological Islamic state.
Absolutely. Or the Islamic connection can be simply decorative, like that Pakistan will be a democracy in which the ethics of Islam will prevail. They can just have it at that level. But if they bring it into the constitution, that the prime minister and president both have to take an oath that they are not only Muslims, but that they believe in the finality of the prophethood of Prophet Muhammad, then I think it's not democratic at all. It is majoritarianism already through the constitutional process.
So what you're saying actually means that Pakistan has to fundamentally change the way it perceives itself as a theological, fundamental Muslim state. And only then, when it does that, can it become a credible democracy. You're actually saying something very profound.
Well, I'm a political scientist and not just a journalist. So I've worked a lot through 3 or 4 of my books, which are devoted to this topic. And that's my conclusion. My doctoral thesis was the concept of an Islamic state and analysis of the ideological controversy in Pakistan, where I demonstrated that an Islamic state can be anything but a modern democracy.
Let me put it a little differently, Professor Ahmed. Why has Pakistan been so prone to either outright military dictatorship or behind the scenes effective military control? After all, the Pakistan army is of the same origin and tradition as the Indian army. The Pakistan army, like the Indian army, was trained to respect civilian rule and civilian masters. So why, after partition, did Pakistan keep falling victim to military takeovers?
I think that's the central question. As I said, you see, Pakistan came into being when we discussed last time. Jinnah was aiming at the breakup of India, at the balkanization of India. In doing so, he had no vision for the state he wanted to establish. Rather, his statements could be invoked by fundamentalists, by one speech by the secularists, and many speeches, which is a confusion called Muslim or spiritual democracy. So there was no democratic heritage in the Muslim League movement. The Muslim League movement, which won the 1946-47 election, was rabidly communal. So I call this like a mob movement which came to power in Pakistan, and then they had nothing in common. The politicians who had joined the Muslim League very lately, then they started fighting among each other at the provincial level as well as center versus provinces. And then came the military as a savior. Actually, I was 11 years old in Lahore when the first military coup took place, and people were dancing in the streets that now Pakistan will be saved. The Pakistani politicians were so bad. And
You're saying a very important thing, Professor Ahmed, and I'm going back to the start of your answer. You're saying the first reason why Pakistan has been repeatedly subjected to military takeovers is that Jinnah had no vision for the country. He may have been staunchly in favor of creating a separate Muslim country out of united India, but having done so, he had no vision for the future of that country. That vacuum is something the army stepped into. And the second thing you've said is that within the Muslim League, there was no democratic tradition that could be built upon for the country after independence. That was the second vacuum into which the army stepped in.
Yeah, both you have summed up very well. So these are my two positions. And that's the story. The Pakistan story is that as an idea, it was not a democratic one, that you define the nation in terms of a religion rather than territoriality, which is the modern norm, that all those who live on a territory, irrespective of their religion, caste, language, ethnicity, whatever, belong to the same nation, entitled to the same equal rights. The Muslim League project was that we are Muslims with our own complete system of way of life, laws, constitution. I have quoted Jinnah saying on the 7th of September 1945 that the Quran requires every Muslim to read the Quran because it gives constitutional law, international law, civil law, criminal law, inheritance law. So every sector of life is covered by the Quran.
You're saying again a very important thing, Professor Ahmed. First of all, you're saying that Jinnah has a very large measure of responsibility and blame to carry on his shoulders for the fact that Pakistan has been ruled by army dictators for virtually half of its independent history. And the second thing you're saying, and I'm referring to that statement of Jinnah's of 1945 that you quoted yourself a moment ago, Jinnah's belief which was a mistaken belief that constitution, democracy, inheritance, the economy, all could flow out of the Quran, again was mistaken and wrong.
Whether it was his belief or it was a very effective tool to claim Pakistan for such a project, we can always discuss. But this speech of his has been invoked even in the Constituent Assembly when the debate was going on the Pakistan Constitution. That look, this is what Jinnah said.
So Jinnah has a large measure of blame to carry on his shoulders for the fact Pakistan has been repeatedly subjected to military rule. Jinnah is the first to blame.
Absolutely. I've demonstrated it over 808 pages. The book has been published both in Pakistan and in India. And there is now a Hindi edition here and an Urdu edition published by Nizam Sethi.
But you know that your own countrymen in Pakistan will be furious to hear you say that the first person to blame for the fact Pakistan has been subjected repeatedly to military rule is Jinnah. They consider him the Qaid-e-Azam and the founder of the country. You're saying he's primarily to blame for the fact democracy has never taken root. He's primarily to blame for the fact military dictators have ruled for almost half the time.
Let me put it this way. Without Jinnah, maybe there would be no Pakistan. So Pakistan came into being because of his skills as a lawyer, the way he pleaded the case. But that he had no vision, and that part of his legacy has come to haunt Pakistan. So what has happened subsequently in Pakistan can be traced back to some of the decisions of Jinnah. For example, without any precedent in constitutional parliamentary theory and practice, he dismissed an entirely legitimate government which had a majority in the legislature, and there was no law and order situation in the Northwest Frontier Province. And his own governor, hand-picked governor, Sir George Cunningham, says that I don't understand according to what principle has this government been dismissed. So
are you saying that Jinnah actually didn't have democratic credentials himself, that his instinct and his behavior was often undemocratic, citing the example of what he did in NWFP, as it was then called?
Yes, he was a very autocratic head of the state who actually usurped the powers of the prime minister. The prime minister was just there as somebody docile, just listening to him. Liaquat Ali Khan had no powers really. It was Jinnah who decided most of the things until about May 1948 when he started becoming sick.
Let me put this to you. Many of the people who came to power in Pakistan after Jinnah, I'm talking about Liaquat Ali Khan, who you mentioned a moment ago, the country's first prime minister, but also Khwaja Nazimuddin, Muhammad Ali Bogra, Muhammad Ali Surawardi, Feroz Khan Noon. None of them actually had roots in that part of the country that became Pakistan. All of them had roots on the other side in what was India, which they left behind. Because they didn't belong to the provinces where Pakistan was created, did they lack the confidence to hold elections, to be democratic? Did they fear that their own lack of support would mean free, fair elections could end up with them losing power?
That, I think, was a very real fear with them, because the people who came to Pakistan, mostly to the Sindh province, were only 3% of the population of Pakistan in 1947. But if you look at the prime minister, some of the major ministries, and the bureaucracy, it was all the Urdu-speaking people who then called the shots. But going to the polls, getting the opinion of the people was a big risk. So Liaquat Ali Khan, invoked this fear of the threat from India and internal rebellion as two reasons why we can't have elections at the moment. Pakistan is in an emergency situation. So that argument I've heard, I grew up with that, and it's still there, that Pakistan is threatened by internal and external enemies.
In other words, it wasn't just Jinnah, the founder of the country, who was, as you said, an autocratic head of state who usurped the powers of the country and the prime minister in particular. It wasn't just the fact that Jinnah had no vision. It was also the fact that the others around him, the ones that I've just named, who became the first 5-6 prime ministers of the country, were in a real sense, strangers and outsiders to Pakistan. They'd come from elsewhere in India. They never had the confidence to be democratic or to hold elections. Their insecurity meant democracy didn't take roots.
That's one thing. Then internally in the social class structure of Pakistan, the class which benefited most were landlords. Landlords have never been interested in elections. So we didn't have a strong middle class, liberal sort of constituency investing a great hope in elections. And there were no land reforms, for example. Without land reforms, the property holdings of such classes was still there. So the social order remained within their control, and it is still largely the same type of, let's say, conservative classes who, along with the establishment, form the Pakistan elite. And no section of the elite is actually keen on getting a mandate from the people.
Let me quote a view that is often written about and ask if you agree with it.
Yeah.
Whereas the politicians who came to power in Pakistan were strangers to that part of the country, they all came from India and therefore lacked confidence to be democratic in provinces where they were strangers. The civil service of Pakistan came from Punjab and from that part of the world. It was native to Pakistan. The army was also largely native to Pakistan. And it's often said that the interests of landlords, as you mentioned, the civil service and the army combined to ensure that an elite was formed that kept the politicians unnerved and unsteady and insecure and kept power perhaps under a camouflage of civilian rule under its own hands. And that's another reason why democracy never took root.
Exactly. That's what I've been saying. Yes, absolutely correct.
Let me then, as an army son, come back to why the army in Pakistan and why particularly Ayub Khan was the first Praetorian general to grab power. Ayub Khan, as you know, was a contemporary at Sandhurst of Indian Army chiefs like Cariappa, Rajendra Singh Ji, Srinagesh, Thamaya, indeed my own father, Prannath Thapar. After independence, the condition in both countries was not dissimilar. They faced very similar problems, similar insecurities, similar internal and external threats. And yet Ayub behaved very differently to his Indian counterparts. He grabbed power when the first opportunity came his way, having been defense minister before that. None of the Indian contemporaries ever thought along those lines. What made Ayub different to them?
Well, the situation in Pakistan, the political class of Pakistan, let's say if we remove Jinnah and Liaquat Ali Khan, there was no leaders who could come up and claim a national sort of status. None of them. They were just mediocre people, local with all those maneuvers which take place locally, and that's all. There was nobody there was no political party comparable to the Congress party. There was no prime minister like Jawaharlal Nehru at the helm of affairs in Pakistan. Somebody had to fill that vacuum. And when Ayub came to power, honestly, people thought he was the savior. And for the first 3-4 years, Pakistan did very well in terms of economic growth. The World Bank was funding Pakistan. India's rate of growth was notoriously 2.7% and Pakistan's 5.3%. And then they went into this Operation Gibraltar, Operation Grand Slam to get Kashmir back, to get Kashmir for Pakistan, and came the 65 war. And after that, I think the army's tentacles then were well entrenched in all sectors of society.
But again, you're saying a very important thing.
Yeah.
Key difference between Ayub Khan in Pakistan and generals like Cariappa, Rajendra Singh Ji, Srinagesh Thamaya in India is that Ayub had a vacuum he could step into, a vacuum created by the ineptitude and the inability of civilian politicians to actually govern and rule. Ayub stepped in, was welcomed as a savior when he first stepped in, That vacuum didn't exist in India. There was Congress, there was Jawaharlal Nehru. The army was therefore kept firmly under civilian control in India. In Pakistan, Ayub took over control because there was a vacuum he could step into.
That's absolutely, you have summed up very well. Exactly, that's the Pakistan story. And I would say that it's only during Ayub Khan's time that we had some progressive laws introduced, like the Muslim family law. You know, in India, you are having a problem with this Muslim personal law, but Ayub Khan reformed the personal law and improved the rights of women,
Okay.
gave and introduced a age limit for marriage, and orphans who are
There's no doubt that the one big difference between Ayub and dictators that followed him, like Zia in particular, is that Ayub was secular. There was nothing Islamist about him. He made Pakistan a modern country. He was extremely popular, for example, with Jackie Kennedy and JFK. That is agreed. But I'm sticking to the reasons why the army in Pakistan has grabbed power and often retained it for 35 years at a time, which didn't happen in India. And I'm sticking also to the question, why has Pakistan failed to become a credible democracy, whilst India or Sri Lanka have clearly succeeded? Let's move to recent decades. After General Zia's death, Pakistani politicians have often readily compromised with the army. Whether it's Benazir Bhutto, Nawaz Sharif, Imran Khan, or Shehbaz Sharif, they've all agreed to provide a civilian facade to camouflage military rule that was actually where the power lay. This is the period during which elections began to be called selections. This is the period during which the army began to be called either the deep state or the establishment. How much of the blame for the failure of democracy in the 80s, 90s, 2000s onwards lies with these prime ministers from Benazir to Nawaz Sharif to Imran Khan to Shehbaz Sharif?
You see, there was a imbalance in the power structure of Pakistan. The Pakistan military, or rather the Pakistan army, was overwhelmingly strong and powerful vis-a-vis the politicians. So they were at the mercy of the general headquarters. This is all demonstrated by many scholars, and in my book, Pakistan, the Garrison State, the title, the Pakistan, the Garrison State, is a metaphor to express this, that politicians, challengers didn't matter. They could just with impunity be set aside. And it's only now that I think Imran Khan introduces a new factor in Pakistani politics, because it seems that the people are very defiant despite the same attempt by the army to.
So you're saying, Professor Ahmed, that modern day prime ministers like Benazir, Nawaz Sharif, Imran, and Shehbaz were simply too weak to stand up to the army. The garrison state, which is, I think, a wonderful metaphor, actually kept control. These prime ministers provided a civilian facade or camouflage, but real power was with the establishment until Imran began to try and change it. And when he did, he paid for it with his prime ministership.
Let me say that Nawaz Sharif, prior to him, tried to do the same, and they threw him out. And they brought Imran Khan. Now, Imran Khan has proved to be what we say infant terrible, the infant terrible of politics. You know, he just can't. He can't be shouted down the way maybe.
Which is why he too has been thrown out.
Yes, absolutely. There is no other reason.
Any one of these four prime ministers who tried to stand up to the army found that his or her term was terminated, he or she was thrown out. In other words, they were only convenient to the army as a civilian masquerading facade. Power didn't lie with them, power lay with the establishment.
Quite right.
The great losers in all of this, Professor Ahmed, are obviously the people of the country. Not only have they been denied a meaningful democracy, but even when given a chance to vote, their vote usually simply doesn't count. How do the people of Pakistan, the ordinary man and woman on the street, view the way they've been treated?
I think insofar as the smaller provinces are concerned, like Balochistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, even in Sindh, the admiration for the armed forces is not the same as it was in Punjab. The new thing is that even in the Punjab now, people are openly, uh, challenging the generals, abusing them, writing nasty things about them. So people can only express their wrath through these social media ways. If they go out in the streets, the treatment meted out to them is very brutal. And so many of them are in jail. In Balochistan, there are people who have been, uh, they are missing since a long time. So Pakistan's record of dealing with political opposition is a very bad one.
So you're saying that the awe in which the army, or the reverence in which the army was once held, is fast depleting and diminishing? That even in Punjab, where the hold of the army was the strongest, its influence was the greatest, even there, people are beginning to question the army and move out of the army's influence and hold. In other words, there is a very significant change taking place in terms of how the people of Pakistan view the establishment and the army.
Yeah, I think so. This is my perception, and a perception many would share with you, that this is how things are. Yeah.
Let's come, Professor Ahmed, to the situation that prevails today. The PMLN, the PPP, and the MQM have agreed to form a coalition government. They have a few other smaller allies as well. But the credibility of that government, which could come into being in the next 10, 12 days, has been challenged both by Imran Khan's PTI, but more importantly, by public opinion. So how credible and how stable can this government be when it's formed, and how long can it last?
Well, there are speculations that they need some sort of government to get the budget passed, and that would be sometimes from May to July this happens. This government, in order to last longer, must come up with some credible new measures, economic reforms, and you know, to stimulate the economy in some way, because the Pakistan's uh, industrial sector is in a very bad shape. Agriculture is stagnant. The bazaars are empty. And so people find no future in such a Pakistan.
So let me ask you, Professor Ahmed, does this government actually have the adequate talent to tackle those incredible problems that Pakistan faces? You have the worst economic crisis in your history staring you in the face and getting possibly worse. You have terrorism, which is erupting right across the country. You have deep political polarization between this new government and its supporters, and Imran Khan and his supporters, and indeed the people of Pakistan who seem to be with Imran Khan. And then you have the threat of frequent floods and environmental change. Is this government likely to be able to tackle any of that?
Well, Shahbaz Sharif was prime minister for almost a year, and nothing was achieved at that during that period. So there is no uh, empirical basis to believe that this time they will be able to work a miracle. If you ask me what is constant in Pakistan's politics is opposition to India, no trade with India, and if the new government can take uh, can have the courage to say we want normalizations of relations with India and we want trade with India, this could be a new factor which can help Pakistan. If the
That entirely depends upon whether General Asim Munir, the army chief, is prepared to actually improve relations with India.
Yes.
Relations with India, relations with Afghanistan, relations with America are areas where the army takes the call, the civilian government simply implements it. That's been the tradition for the last 30 years.
I agree, but if this new government is to make a change, and there is some scope for it, one reason why I thought they brought Nawaz Sharif was that somewhere there in the headquarters or whatever, there was an understanding that we have tried everything of this rabid, animosity towards India doesn't pay us. So let's try Nawaz Sharif, who has a good standing in India with the government. But then they even promoted Bilawal, who is on record calling the Indian Prime Minister the butcher of Gujarat. So what the headquarters, the establishment, what they are thinking really is impossible to.
So you're saying a very important thing. You're saying, Professor Ahmed, not only is this government questionable in terms of how long it'll last. We don't know whether it'll last all of 5 years. We don't know whether it'll last, as you suggested a moment ago, beyond the budget it will present.
Right.
Secondly, we question whether this government has the strength and the talent to tackle the multiple crises which I mentioned earlier, which Pakistan faces. But now you're saying there's even confusion within the minds of the establishment and perhaps General Munir himself in particular about what this government's policy should be, particularly with regard to India. So not only is the government itself likely to be non-performing, but the man with the power behind the government seems to be uncertain and unclear in his thinking.
I think ad hocism is how they function in Pakistan. So that's how it will be. They'll look at the situation, make an assessment, and then generate some policies and withdraw them if they don't work. So there is no far-sighted, foresighted sort of vision that they are pursuing for Pakistan.
Look down the road for me before I end. Everything that you're saying to me will be apparent to the Pakistani people and deeply disheartening and disillusioning for them, because after all, this is their country we're talking about. Now they, the Pakistani people, as well as Imran Khan and his PTI, know that in all likelihood, in all truth, the elections were won by the PTI, possibly not just at the center, possibly in Punjab, the most important province as well. And yet, through machinations, that victory has been denied to them both at the center and Punjab. How do you think both the PTI and the people will respond in the weeks and months to come? Will they grit their teeth and accept this outcome? Or do you see the potential for resistance and perhaps some sort of rebellion?
Well, Imran Khan in the past has been very defiant and has refused to be cowed down. But I've heard that people around him are advising him to tone down this and try to work within the parliamentary system. By they are, for example, going to form some sort of alliance with the Sunni Ittihad Council and thereby become a political party of sorts in order to form government if they are given a chance. So it's even possible that behind the scenes there are negotiations going on with Imran Khan. I would not overrule that completely.
In other words, you're saying Pakistan will have a troubled future because of an insecure, weak government. Pakistan will have a troubled future because the army is itself unclear in its thinking. But the danger of rebellion, either from the people or PTI, is unlikely because Imran is perhaps now finding ways, from what you've been told, of working within the system.
Absolutely.
My last question, I'm going to deliberately move away from everything that I've been asking you and put to you a question that many Indian people ask. And maybe after hearing your analysis of why Pakistan has failed to become a credible democracy and why Pakistan is repeatedly prone to military takeover, this question will be back in the minds of the audience, which is why I'm putting it to you. Many people in India believe Pakistan has become a fundamentalist country of religious fanaticism. As a political scientist and a Pakistani, is that the correct way for Indians to think of Pakistan and, more importantly, the Pakistan people? Or do you want to correct that impression?
No, I don't agree at all that Pakistan at any stage has become a fundamentalist society. I think when people from India go to any part of Pakistan, for example, Lahore, Hindus, Sikhs, the way the people locally treat them is so amazingly warm and generous that for me, that's what the people spontaneously are feeling. But over the years, the educational system, the educational curriculum, the state propaganda has been so morbidly anti-India, anti-Hindu, that a very large number of people in the political circles are amenable to such a way of thinking. But by and large, the people of Pakistan, especially Punjabis, are good-hearted, warm-hearted, and I think recently there was a Voice of America polling in Pakistan about youth from 18 to 34, and 69 to 70% voted for good relations with India. So I don't think Pakistan as a society is fundamentalist.
So you're saying leave the government on one side, leave politicians on one side, leave the education system on one side. The people of Pakistan have no animosity or ill will for India. They have affection and friendship and warmth instead.
And the same when I come to India, I'm told they hate Muslims, they hate Pakistanis, but everywhere I go, people recognize me and they embrace me. It's the same people on the other side. It's just politics, bad politics.
Professor Ahmed, that is a very reassuring note on which to end this interview. Thank you very much for making time for me. Enjoy your stay in India. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.